In 1986, 17-year-old Shondra May lived in an unincorporated area of Scott County, Mississippi, called Pea Ridge, approximately 12 miles north of the county seat of Forest. Shondra was active in extracurricular activities at the small high school she attended and was looking forward to graduating in the spring. Shondra also worked part-time at a local McDonald's. On Tuesday, February 4th, 1986, Shondra started a shift there at 6 p.m. However, it was a rainy evening, so there were not many customers, and Shondra was asked to leave early. She clocked out at 7:24, waited a few minutes to see if business would pick up so that she could clock back in, and then left at 7:40. Shondra called her mother to tell her she was on her way home, as she always did. She then stopped to buy a Valentine's Day card for her boyfriend and began driving home. She did not arrive home by 8 o'clock, as she had told her mother she would. Her mother became concerned, and at 8:20 she went outside and discovered Shondra's car just short of their driveway. The car was still running, the front driver's side door was open, and the interior light was on. There was no sign of Shondra. Shondra would remain missing for 22 days. On February 26, 1986, an off-duty firefighter was digging for worms to use as fishing bait in the banks of Baker's Lake. The lake was located near Bolton, Mississippi, in Hinds County, approximately 80 miles away from Shondra's family home. He noticed something floating in the water. It was a body, wrapped in plastic bags. It would later be identified as Shondra May. Shondra's murder was still unsolved when we covered it in January of 2022. However, on April 29, 2025, an arrest was finally made in the case. 63-year-old Reuben Weeks was arrested in his camper on Movietown Drive in Canton, Mississippi. Scott County Sheriff Mike Lee believes that Weeks is the sole person responsible for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Shondra May. Weeks had been a suspect in the case for a very long time. In August of 1992, while Weeks was serving a life sentence plus 30 years for rape and kidnapping in Missouri, he was brought to Mississippi for questioning in Shondra's case due to similarities between Shondra's murder and the crime for which he was incarcerated. On October 13, 1991, he had pulled a motel clerk from her car. He bound her with tape and raped her. Weeks was apprehended for this crime in his home state of Mississippi, where he had an extensive criminal record, consisting mainly of nonviolent offenses. Weeks could not be tied to Shondra's murder at the time of his interview in 1992, and he was returned to Missouri to serve out his sentence. I could not find any details about when or why he was released from prison in Missouri. By 2025, witnesses who were no longer too scared to testify against him had come forward, which finally led to Weeks being charged with Shondra's murder. Weeks has been denied bond and remains in custody. On the morning of May 2nd, 2001, 50-year-old Leslie Prier failed to arrive at work as scheduled. Therefore, one of her co-workers met Leslie's husband, Carl, at the Prier family home in Chevy Chase, Maryland, to look for her. Inside, they found a violent scene. They called police, who then discovered Leslie's badly beaten body in the master bathroom. We covered the case in 2024, when an arrest was finally made in the case. The man accused of Leslie's murder was 44-year-old Eugene Gligor, a high school boyfriend of Leslie's daughter Lauren. He had been identified using genetic genealogy. Gligor's trial was scheduled to begin in October of 2025. In the meantime, his legal team mounted an aggressive defense and sought to have key pieces of evidence thrown out. Most importantly, they were seeking to have the DNA evidence that tied Gligor to the scene ruled as inadmissible. A hearing to decide that issue was set for August. However, on May 7, 2025, Gligor pled guilty to the murder of Leslie Prier. While he had originally been charged with first-degree murder, his lawyers negotiated a deal with prosecutors that allowed him to plead guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder. He will be sentenced on August 28th and faces up to 30 years in prison. Leslie's family did not make a statement following the plea, but Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy has stated that they are pleased with this outcome. 32-year-old Lauren Colvin Thompson was the single mother of 3 children, ages 3, 5, and 9. On the afternoon of January 10, 2019, she was spending time with a group of friends in Panola County, Texas, after reportedly going fishing earlier in the day. Just before 2 p.m. that afternoon, Lauren called her mother, Tori Colvin, sounding anxious. She asked to speak to her children, but they could not come to the phone at the time. Tori believed she heard someone arguing with her daughter in the background. Lauren apologized for previous behavior and told her mother that she loved her. The 7-minute-long phone call ended at 2 o'clock. 8 minutes later, Lauren called 911. She sounded panicked and told the dispatcher she was being chased. The call lasted for more than 20 minutes before abruptly ending. Authorities could not get Lauren back on the phone despite repeated efforts, and believed that her cell phone must have run out of battery. Lauren had provided the dispatcher with her location, and authorities were quick to respond. They found Lauren's vehicle along an oil and gas lease road off of County Road 267 at FM 1794, just west of the Rock Creek community, stuck in a muddy ditch. Despite a massive search, they could not find Lauren. In the months following Lauren's disappearance, authorities searched more than 2,000 acres of land despite heavy flooding in the area. They also searched over 9,000 acres from the air with helicopters and drones over the course of multiple searches. Lauren's family offered a $5,000 reward for information, but when we first covered her case in March of 2021, she was still missing. On July 27, 2022, a work crew discovered skeletal human remains in a wooded area in a rural part of northwest Panola County. There were no obvious signs of foul play found at the scene. That December, the Panola County Sheriff's Office announced that the remains had been positively identified as those of Lauren Colvin Thompson. The cause and manner of her death remain under investigation. The Sheriff's Office conducted an additional search of the area where Lauren's remains were located on January 12, 2023. They located additional items that were submitted to the lab for examination. Lauren's death remains under investigation. In 1983, Mary Emma Hammond was a 25-year-old newlywed living in a townhome on Elgin Street in Brantford, Ontario. On the morning of September 8th, she left home at 3:30 a.m. for her shift at Buns Master Bakery, roughly a mile away. Her husband of 4 months, Larry, offered to drive her, but she decided to walk. At 4 o'clock, one of Mary's co-workers called Larry to inquire about Mary's whereabouts. She had not made it to the bakery. The police were called to investigate. They were able to trace Mary's footprints on her route to work up until the bakery's rear property line, where Mary would have had to cut across a field to get to the entrance. While there were no signs of Mary herself, some of her possessions had been left behind, including one of her socks, a half-eaten apple, and a dish from her packed lunch. Ominously, police also isolated a small amount of blood at the scene. Brantford police reopened the case in 2012 but it was not solved until 2022, when detectives with the Brantford Police Service identified Stephen Mudko as the person they believed to be responsible for the abduction and murder of Mary Emma Hammond. He was identified using mitochondrial DNA. His home on Memorial Drive had been searched during the initial investigation. Unfortunately, Mudko could not be arrested or questioned, as he died in 2010. Mary's remains have still not been located, and police are hoping that publicly identifying Mudko will lead to witnesses coming forward who will hopefully help finally locate them. In 1988, Melissa Tremblay and her mother lived in Salem, New Hampshire. On Sunday, September 11th of that year, 11-year-old Melissa traveled to Lawrence, Massachusetts, a 20-minute drive away from her home, with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. At some point, while the adults were socializing at the LaSalle Social Club on Andover Street, Melissa left the building to go play in the neighborhoods surrounding the club. Melissa was last seen in the late afternoon by a railroad worker and a pizza delivery man. When Melissa's mother later went outside looking for her, she could not find her. Melissa's mother and her boyfriend frantically looked for Melissa throughout the neighborhoods around the social club, but still found no signs of her. They called police to report Melissa missing at 9 p.m. Melissa would not be found until the following day, September 12, 1988. Her body was found in the old Boston and Maine Railway Yard near Andover Street and South Broadway, not far from the social club. She had been stabbed to death. After she was killed, her body had been run over by a train, amputating her left leg. Despite a massive investigation, Melissa's case remained unsolved for decades. We covered it on this channel in 2022, when an arrest was finally made in the case. On the evening of April 26, 2022, 74-year-old Marvin C. McClendon Jr. of Bremen, Alabama, was arrested as a fugitive from justice because an arrest warrant had been issued in Massachusetts charging him with the murder of Melissa Tremblay. McClendon was a retired corrections officer previously employed by the Massachusetts Department of Corrections on 3 different occasions between 1970 and 2002. He was living in Massachusetts and known to spend time in Lawrence at the time of Melissa's murder. He had been tied to the murder thanks to DNA evidence found on Melissa's body. McClendon went to trial on December 7, 2023. On December 27th, after 32 hours of deliberation, the jury told the judge that they were deadlocked and could not agree on a verdict. The judge therefore declared a mistrial. McClendon went to trial for a second time on October 15, 2024. The jury began their deliberations on October 28th. On November 4th, this jury also told the judge that they were deadlocked. He instructed them to continue trying to reach a unanimous verdict, which they successfully did the following day. On November 5th, 2024, McClendon was found not guilty of Melissa's murder. A central argument to McClendon's defense involved DNA that had been found under Melissa's fingernails. Only a partial profile could be developed, and McClendon had been identified based on his Y chromosome and paternal lineage. The prosecution argued that the DNA evidence still excluded 99.8% of the male population, and meant that the killer was a member of the McClendon family. McClendon, his brother, and his father had lived in Massachusetts at the time of the murder, so much of the prosecution's case involved demonstrating why Marvin C. McClendon Jr. was the only one of the 3 men who could have committed the crime. McClendon's defense argued that a much larger number of men were included in the 0.2% of males who could not be excluded by the DNA evidence than prosecutors implied. They ran the DNA through a proprietary DNA database and found 155 matches to men with 86 different surnames. Since McClendon was found not guilty, Melissa's case is still unsolved. It is unclear how the investigation will continue from here. On the night of June 5th, 1986, 4-year-old Jessica Jessie Gutierrez slept in the double bed she shared with her older sister, 6-year-old Becky. She did not fall asleep until around midnight on June 6th, when her mother, Deborah, woke up for the day just a few hours later. She found her children's room in disarray. Their school papers were scattered across the floor, and the curtains had been pulled from one window. In addition, the front door was open. Deborah realized that Jessie was not in the room with Becky. When she asked Becky where her little sister was, Becky replied, "She's gone. The man with the magic hat and the beard took her last night." Becky had been too scared to move to go ask for help or to go back to sleep. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, no arrests were made in the case for decades. We covered the case in January of 2022, following the arrest of 61-year-old Thomas Eric McDowell of Wake Forest, North Carolina, on January 6th. He was charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree burglary in connection with Jessie's case. While McDowell was charged with Jessie's murder, authorities had still not located her body. According to the arrest warrant, McDowell was charged based on his fingerprint being a match to one found on Jessie's window, a witness identifying him in a photo lineup, and his own admissions to the crime made to others while he was incarcerated. Since we covered the case on this channel, McDowell did go to trial. His trial began on February 5th, 2024. The jury was sent to deliberate on February 8th. After just 2 hours, they returned with a verdict. They found McDowell guilty of murder, kidnapping, and burglary in the death of Jessica Gutierrez. That same day, McDowell was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. Jessica's remains have still not been found, which is a great source of heartache for her family. Following the reading of the verdict she waited nearly 40 years for, Jessica's mother, Deborah, said in a statement that, "I hope he confesses to where her body is. Only he and God know that, and I'm hoping eventually he will let me know or confide in someone, because I have a place already for her next to her family."